Hey, Lewis, welcome. And I just want to really kick us off by introducing the fact that we're on this call together on the other side of the world. I mean, I'm in Sydney, you're in Spain,
Yep.
and we're talking about this amazing partnership that we've created between the zone and Equilibria. And it's very special to me because I believe that we, as organizations, we're very aligned. We're very aligned with our values, and we're very aligned about trying to really make the most of human potential, but also keep people safe. I mean, the zone is all about keeping people in a safe environment, emotionally safe. And I know that you started Equilibria and eColors by working in very high stakes environments where safety and people's physical safety was really at risk. So I'd love to hear what was the birth of eColors? What was the why did you start Equilibria? I'd love to hear that story, and I know our listeners would love to hear that story too.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some of what we've been doing and all being well, how we can move forward together. My background is oil and gas. I started off in the North Sea in the mid 70s. Saw a lot of people over my time getting, unfortunately, hurt, maimed, and killed. And in the late 90s, they actually made me the HSE manager for the largest drilling contractor in the world. And just when we were getting to a point where we were getting a lot safer, we started to go through mergers and acquisitions. And the culture that we built up over several years started to dissipate very quickly to a point where one of our rigs in Nigeria had a fatality one year. And I was sent down there to see how I could help out. We had really good procedures. The company spent a lot of money on safety equipment, but here we were having had a fatality. And literally sitting around with the crew one night, we had talked a little bit about what we now call the e-colors, but really just on a very kind of high level. And sitting with the crew one night, I said, we got to be missing something. Can you all tell me, what are your strengths? What are your what we now call potential limiters? We used to call improvement opportunities. And a guy who I'll be eternally grateful to, called Kevin Bartow, turned around and said, "Well, if you're going to look at from a personality perspective, why don't you ask us how we can get hurt?" And I went, "Okay, how can you get hurt?" He said, "Well, my colors are yellow blue. I can get hurt jumping in to help people." And the moment he said that, it was like a light bulb moment for me because I know my mother, who actually passed away during COVID in Australia, actually, where she lived many years. She was yellow blue, spent 3 nights a week on a suicide line in Australia, almost till the year that she died, trying to help people. So that was my data point number one. And very quickly, we began to realize if we could help people understand how they could get hurt or worse relative to their personality, that was something worth going for. Literally a year later, somebody got hurt on that same rig again. They flew the guy into town in the middle of the night, which they normally don't do in Nigeria. And unfortunately, the helicopter crashed. Pilot died, co pilot died. The guy who got hurt died. And the guy who was sent in to help look after the guy who got hurt died. And I went back to that rig. And during that process, fortunately, we were working with Chevron, who were determined to make a stand and go, "You're not going back to work until this rig can work safely." To cut a long story short, about 5 weeks or long of a shutdown, about halfway through, the vice president of Transocean said to me, "Lewis, weren't you going to start your own company?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We'll start it tonight. Bring one of your co-founders out here and we'll support you for the first 3 years." And that was the start of Equilibria. 4th of April, 2004, myself and three others, who were all ex-Transocean, we decided to start Equilibria. And it's been a phenomenal, phenomenal journey ever since, Liam.
Wow. what a story, and of course, unfortunate elements too. But I mean, I mean, now you've probably saved more lives than had been lost in the creation of eColors. So so did eColors exist before that incident? Because you said, oh, the guy said I'm a yellow blue, and we all know what yellow blues are like.
Right.
Uh, so
We,
it
we,
existed in a form.
we had it in a form. We'd used another system on a very kind of light basis. But
Mm,
then when we started Equilibria, we decided to kind of start from scratch. So we spent a long time just asking people. We were doing a lot of work in person. Thank goodness, very quickly Chevron took on what we were doing. And before we knew where we are, we were on their rigs all over the world. And we were continually asking people, what are your strengths? What are your potential limiters? How could you get hurt? What makes it difficult to stop the job? And as we piled the information together, that's where the e-colors were born. And I
mm,
think today we've probably got about over 250 questions, which I think we probably have the biggest data lake of information about why people do what they do in the way that they do it relative to their personality that is spread into multiple different industries and walks of life.
mm. No, it's fantastic. And look, why we wanted to partner with Equilibria was because of your backstory, because we knew that you'd created this product on the basis of trying to help, trying to add value. It wasn't just we're going to try and create something commercial. The driving force was about service to others, which was the same uh, sort of driving force that started the zone in 1999. And for me, it was a little bit of a different story though, because I'd been an entrepreneur, and I had quite a big business in London. But I tell this story, and I have to laugh sometimes because I'm sure people would just say, "Well, I don't want to work with that guy." But and I'd led this business and grown this business, and was a very profitable business, and we had a lot of staff, hundreds of staff, and but I'd turned into an asshole. So I'd become like greedy, egotistical, manipulative. It was all about me, just making some money. And I had a wake up call around that, and it was funny because I was at a party with my cousins, and I was back in New Zealand where I was born, and I was sort of big noting it, like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and it's multi-million dollars worth of. And my cousin took me out the back, and I was standing there with my beer like this, and he says, "Mate, we don't care what you've got, what you've made, and like, we want the old Liam back. You've turned into an asshole." Now, that's pretty hard coming from anyone. But if it had come from anyone else, I would have thought, oh, they're just jealous, or whatever it is of what I've created. But because it was coming from my best friend, my cousin, who we've been best friends since we were babies, basically, it really got me. It went into the heart. As I say, it was one of those heart to heart moments, right? And so at the end of that, I just stopped drinking. I put my beer down, and I just went into every other conversation. And rather than dominating it and turning it about me and how great I was, and hey, look at me, I just asked questions like, how are you? What's happening? Tell us about you. Tell us about what your successes are. And that was the foundation of the zone. It's like, and I say it was like bringing the heart back into my organization. And that's what we've been doing for the last 25 years around the world, is bringing the heart back into leadership and heart back into organizations, and getting that balance between head and heart. I mean, we need the head, in business. We need the strategy, and we need to do all the spreadsheets and stuff, but that's only a real part of it. That's the mechanics of the organization. The heart of the organization is the people, the culture, the leadership, and building those amazing teams. So that's what we've been doing for the last 25 years, is building amazing teams, building like really amazing leaders, and great companies. So, it's like we call it sort of awakening greatness, but it's all about being more human, and it's also about becoming a force for good. It was sort of like I've spent the last 25 years trying to help people not be like I was. So so a bit crazy. Yeah. Um, so you know, in terms of eColors application, I know you know, you have this amazing data lake of information. I mean, we can call on you for anything, and you go, oh, we've done that. Yeah, we've got the questions, which is amazing. And how do you see sort of e-colors in terms of evolving over time? I mean, I know that you guys are so open to customization and and things like that, and we're getting a huge amount of value from it, and so are our clients. But is there anything else that's going on in the background that people would love to hear about, like or anything? Any funny stories about eColors? Those crazy people.
Well, I think it's probably worth if I just take it back a little bit through the kind of evolution, that might make a bit more sense. So, like you say, at the beginning, I mean, our total focus was we had one single card. I'll never forget it. Paul, who is one of our co-founders, and myself, we walked into BP, British Petroleum, or Beyond Petroleum in Houston with this one card which had "How could I get hurt?" from an e-colors perspective, and we thought, fantastic, this will change the world. Which, to a degree, we certainly made an impact. But what was interesting was every time we started to think this must be the answer to what the issue is, the next thing would come up. So we started with "How could I get hurt?" Then there was a lot of push, and still is today, but 2007, 2008 was organizations giving people the responsibility, accountability to stop work authority. So you see something that's unsafe, stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And this was really interesting because in the 30 years that I'd worked on rigs, a lot of that as an offshore installation manager, and I am predominantly yellow red. My colors are yellow red. So I don't have a problem stepping in and stopping the job. And in my ignorance in those days, I didn't realize other people did have a problem relative to their personality. So we had a good, long, hard look at what makes it difficult to exercise stop work authority. From that, actually, we came up with the idea that if people aren't prepared to stop others, maybe it'd be better to have something where they could kind of intervene on themselves. So we made this thing called personal intervention. So, for example, I am predominantly yellow red, so I have a yellow red wristband, and there's a pause and play button on here. And to this day, there are many times when I think I just need to press pause, and that will stop me instinctively jumping into help, which is my natural tendency. Then a few years later, you start looking at why aren't people following procedures where some e-color combinations find it incredible that people won't follow an instruction, and there are others who absolutely will. So you say you're buying furniture, right? I know
Yeah.
a lot of people will put something together and go, well, there's still half a dozen screws, and well, the other, well, did you read the info? Oh, no, no. So all of these things started to play out, and over the years, we've just applied the e-colors to so many different aspects of life. I will tell you, Liam, that one of the joys in my life is we started to work in schools. So
Mm.
we actually bring the e-colors in at 7, and
Wow.
we bring in personal intervention at 9. And I mean, I will tell you that the average school we worked with, and I can talk about the States, which is where we've done most of the work, the average graduation rate prior to bringing the e-colors was 78.2%. And post e-colors, 3 years on, it's around 99 to 100% graduation rate.
Wow.
And and that's because the kids are understanding things that maybe we're 50 before we get to
I
to
wish
understand. So, you can apply that to all walks of life, and that's what's been
Mm.
happening. So when we first started to get to know about yourselves through Rick, and I must say he's obviously been highly influential in this discussion. When I look up, he walked me through your whole program actually a few days ago because I really wanted to understand, where were the crossovers? What are you doing that maybe we could really help with? There's so many things where recognizing we're all human beings and we're all different, right? But at the
Yeah,
end of the day, if there's an understanding of the e-colors and how personality impacts what we do on a moment by moment basis, it just makes for a whole better organization, family, community, however far you can get it.
yeah.
And so I honestly feel very privileged and excited that I'm going to be 75 in a few days and I'm having the time of my life. And that's all this is what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a great story. In fact, we were doing eColors with a group last night, and what was really interesting is they've had a new CEO, and so we said, "Hey, why don't we take a look at who the past CEO is based on their colors, and the new CEO is based on the colors?" And like literally, it was diametrically opposed, right? And you know, the old CEO was very much sort of introverted, office in the corner, didn't say much, very analytical. And the new CEO was, let's get out there and change the world, and it's all about sales, and it's all sort of like the red yellow. Um, and I was saying to them, I said, okay, cool. So what do you think is going to happen to the strategy for the business based on the CEO and their new exec team? And they were like, "Oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that." And I said, "Yeah, well, this is how much personality can impact organizations." And so we did a deep dive on, okay, how would that affect the strategy? What would the strategy be now? You know, what would the risk element appetite be? And how would we work with your investment managers? How would we work with your salespeople? How would we work with your project manager? It was a really fantastic session, and people just came out were like, "Wow, this is going to change the game for us." Because, funny enough, they were a finance team, but it's just going to change the game for us, and that's what we found with doing the work, the eColors work across our client base. It gives them an awareness that they didn't have before about how they interact with people, what's their triggers, where they have to press pause, where they have to press play, their communication style. And one of the things I think that people love the most is the analogy of the wells. And
Yeah,
if you're a high red, well, you've only got to let the bucket down a little bit to get the water, to get the red. But if you're a low green, you got to let that. It's a lot of work to put the bucket down. And
yeah.
people, those analogies and that simplicity and the way that your profile gives someone real simple takeaways is what attracted us to it, because we're very much of the mindset that simplicity is what count unlocks complexity. So if you've got a complex problem, let's try and get it down to the basics, the absolute core of the core of the core, and that's what makes a difference. And I think the last thing is, which talks to leadership in a lot of way, which is one of the elements that leaders really that they have to play is they're building their character. And as you say, like, personality is a bit like your default. Your character is something you design over time, right? So it's your natural responses or reaction might be very different. But if you want to build character, that's where you pause and play. And if you continue to do that and build your, leadership reach, you will be, a great leader. And unlike I was, unlike I was those many years ago, right, where I was like driving, red was it, and red for me, no, for not for anyone else, red for me. So
Well,
yeah,
I think one of the things that we all come to realize over time, if you're not careful, you can become what we call a slave to your potential limiters. So I
Right.
got to a point in 2002 where I literally collapsed on the floor thinking I was dying because I'd been so het on trying to help people. And actually, while I was lying on the floor, I made four promises, which in my head kept me alive, which is I'll spend more time with the family. I will be a better listener. I'll never have an argument again. And I'll find a way to help people communicate. And that was another way of starting why I wanted to start Equilibria. But I do think it's interesting. And again, I know you get exposed to the same, kind of levels of organizations that we do. We work with a lot of people who are great individual contributors, and then somebody in the organization says, "You have done so well, we're going to make you into a leader." And they go, "No, no, that's not what I went to university for." So, which may come very naturally to some people to make that leap, but for others, they really need some help. And so, when we talk about realizing potential, which actually is our vision, it's really important to understand that
Yes.
giving people the tools that don't come naturally to them is a big, big plus.
Exactly. Exactly. And everyone wants to do better. Everyone wants to improve. Everyone wants to grow. I mean, some people are like, it's maybe a higher percentage of what they're thinking about daily, but everyone wants to grow and improve. And, exactly as you say, I mean, if you've got your organization which is on a growth path like that, but your leaders are on a growth path that's under here, it doesn't take long before that gap gets so limitations of the leaders actually start to slow everything down. So it's very much as you say, it's like how do we continue to grow, and understanding your e-colors is really really important. And as you know, we define the zone as that place where happiness and high performance coexists. So that for us is that special place. And if we can get leaders in the zone, we can get organizations in the zone and teams in the zone and people in the zone. You imagine what the potential is then, if everyone's sort of like in there, got their little zone and they're working together. And that's why we created what we call our three golden rules. It wasn't the same as your four agreements. Um, and our three golden rules are pretty simple, but if you follow them, things go very, very well in organizations. The first golden rule is get yourself in the zone. And what that demands of you is that you understand yourself, and e-colors is part of understanding yourself. Another part is what are your values? Another part is like, what's your personal purpose? So it's really understanding who you are, what gives you energy, what's your limiters and what's your superpower and your kryptonites. So that's rule number one. And then, so it's get yourself in the zone. Now we all know that's great to say, but some days it just ain't going to happen, right? Some days it's just not a zone day. Um, and that's where sort of rule number two comes in, particularly in working with teams or even, with families or organizations, which is help someone else get in the zone. Because you know when someone's not in the zone, right? You know when they're a little snappy or a little bit quiet or a little bit tense. They're not in the zone. And the person, hey, they're having a bit of a bad day or whatever it is. So we encourage people to actually reach out and say, hey, is there anything I can do? Can I help? Can I get you a coffee, a cup of tea? You want to go for a walk? You want to talk about it? You want some space? Can I take some load off you? And often, very professional people will go, no, 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 that's all right. Thanks, but thanks for asking. But what they know about you is that you care. And what sort of world do we want to be in? We want to be in a world where people care about each other. I mean, we don't need it. Maybe you won't get everyone to love each other, but certainly to care for each other or care about each other is super important. And then rule number three is spend more time in the zone together. And why this is important is because when you're in the zone, you make better decisions, right? You're a better communicator, you make better decisions, you're more creative, you've got more energy. When you get in the zone together and spend that time, you unlock what we call collective intelligence. And that's the intelligence of the group, which is more than, just the sum of the individuals. And in fact, it's, been scientifically proven that collective intelligence is greater than the smartest person in the room. So we are very much on the same page about human potential and greatness.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it's remarkable actually. Um, Again, I need to recognize Mark Wilkinson because he's somebody that right now he's become our director of business development over the last 18 months or so. But he and I have kind of known each other for about 15 years. And it was him who actually, talking to Rick, got this discussion going. And when I see what the potential of what he's doing in the UK, for example, it's really exciting to see. I there are a lot of people who could obviously, if we could get more people in the zone right now, the world would be a better place. Let's be absolutely honest. Um, and certainly, I think you're very much talking, our language, if you like. It's fascinating and a blessing the way these things come together. I think it's really important for people to understand that. Just like you're saying about collective intelligence, we've always been good at partnering or collaborating with other organizations because nobody's got the whole answer. Although there are companies who believe they do, but at the end of the day, we're not one of them. And I just want to go back to your Wells analogy because interestingly enough, we were running a train the trainer, which we do a lot in organizations where, they want to have their own eColors experts in.
Hmm.
And it was actually one of the teams of the trainers came up with the idea of the wells.
Okay.
And it's something that so a lot of what we do is because somebody at some point has said, have you thought about this? I'll
Yeah.
take it back a stage further. When we first got started, we were on a massive drilling rig, actually a drill ship in Nigeria called the Pathfinder, which was coming in
Hmm.
from the Gulf of Mexico. And we ran a 4-day workshop, ship completely shut down, 230 people. We just went through all the things you'd expect to do at the beginning of a large campaign. And that included the galley staff. So even the people who made the food, cleaned the rooms, did the beds. And one of our other co-founders, John Lake, and I were sitting in the room going to talk about what we were going to do in the afternoon. And the young Nigerian kid who was cleaning the room, he said, "Excuse me," he said, "I was just in your session and you said that your vision is realizing potential." Yes. He said, "So why do you call it improvement opportunities? Why don't you call it potential limiters?" Thank you. We'll have that. And that kind of thing has been going on for years. So
Yeah.
and that's why the beauty, I just listening to Rick the other day talking about some of the things, you can immediately see how it all starts to click together.
Yeah. Well, well, you know, we use eColors. One of the areas that we use eColors in the most is working with teams and bringing those teams together. And stage one of that, bringing them together, we call it the cocktail party. Everyone's being nice to each other, and like, you got soup down your tie, but no one says anything, or spinach in your teeth. Everyone's just being nice, right? And they're all sort of looking to the boss to tell them what to do a little bit. Well, that's where we often introduce eColors because having that awareness and then sharing about their colors brings people together. It breaks down barriers. It sort of opens the window, if to the person, and people start feeling more safe and more connected and more like they belong somewhere, and so the trust improves. But then what happens is in the next stage, which we call the fight club, and it's not literally fisticuffs. It's more about fighting for territory, fighting for attention, or I'm right, you're wrong type behavior. Um, and thinking you know the answer when there's another perspective, right? And then we use that in what we call the Fight Club to remind people that there's different perspectives. It's a bit like the Rubik cube. There's many, many colors to the same problem or same issue, and different ways of looking at it. And if we can look at those collectively, that's when we can sort of unlock this collective intelligence. And then someone will, just like that Nigerian cleaner said, "Hey, why don't you do that?" I've been in rooms where people just out of the blue have said this one idea, and then everyone's turned and gone, "Wow, that is that's it." Like
Yeah.
eureka moment. And then the person with the idea might not be the best person to actually take that idea through to execution, right? It might not be that might be within their wheelhouse. And so someone else will pick it up, and you just see this group get very excited, and they go from there. And that's what we call when the end stage of the team for us is when it feels a little bit like a jazz band, where it's just where everyone understands their job so well. They all know what they're doing. Someone will step forward, someone will step back. There's no real leader, and people will cover for each other, and they just create this magical, music from nothing. It just keeps creating. And so that to us is the ultimate stage, getting to that element where collective intelligence just lives and breathes, and we can solve problems for our customers or for ourselves or for the planet, whatever we're after, and it just starts to come, and people feel really, really good. They feel really good. So it's like eColors, that everyone's just come together, loves it, understands it, work mesh together, play, pause, and it just creates this magical space. So that's it's really fun, really fun.
I think the other thing, Liam, and you can well imagine, we see it a lot. People get exposed to a lot of different things at work, and
Yeah,
very rarely does that translate outside the office or outside their workplace. But what we find a lot is people will take the e-colors home. In
yes.
fact, I was just on a call this morning with a guy who's got three children. And only after he did the e-colors with his kids does he now understand. One of them has a super tidy room and another one has one like a bomb's gone off, that. But now
Yeah.
it all kind of makes sense. So I think that's one of the other things, and I'm sure you're doing it, but I really would. We always encourage, by the way, because what you'll hear is, oh, I'm going to go home and tell my wife or tell my husband. No, 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 no. Don't tell them.
Dangerous, dangerous.
Very dangerous. But find a way for them to get interested and
Yeah,
find out for themselves. It then it's a bit like the stone in the pond. The ripple
mm,
effect is quite phenomenal. I mean, that's the reality. We've no real idea of how many people have got impacted one way or another. In fact,
no,
we were doing some data searching the other day. I know right now there's 300 or 400 people a day finding out their e-colors, and that's been going on for years. So we just like to feed that collective knowledge back in to whatever. So for example, tomorrow we've got two online workshops. It's mental health awareness in the UK this month. So we're doing two 90-minute sessions around mental health awareness relative to the e-colors. And I am sure we'll learn stuff there tomorrow that none of us have thought of.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Hey, Lewis, I know we're coming to the end, so anything you'd like to close off with, leave the audience with a bit of wisdom, something that you, or maybe something that you wish for the world, whatever, however you want to close off.
Um, I am a big believer in what I call real-time legacy.
Mm,
I see lots of leaders when I ask them, what's their legacy going to be? They go, "Oh, well, I'm not old as you. I haven't thought about that yet." I'm talking about real-time legacy, where every time you choose to interact with or not interact with somebody, you've just left just a little piece of your legacy. And I think in the world today, it's more important than ever that we make an extra effort to understand why people are doing what they're doing. Because in the
Mm.
world of human and organizational performance, people do what they do at the time they do it because it makes sense to them. When you
Yeah.
look at what's going on in the world today, there's got to be stuff going on that makes no sense to anybody. So if we can really get people in the zone, then the world would be a much better place. And if we can help you in any way with that, I'm all in.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. I mean, like and I'm with you on that. Like, if we can instead of judging people, try and find out what's their real motivation, what do they really need, and how can they get their needs met without harming others. That would be a good thing for the world. And so, we see it a lot in organizations where people are given power, and it's not that you have power that's the most important thing as a leader. It's what you do with it, how you wield that power. Do you use it for power over, which was the old me, or do you use it power with? How can I multiply this other person? How can I help this person get better? How can I make them bigger, make them stronger, make them, feel better? And if you do that as a leader and become a multiplier, that's what we call the zone, the ripple effect. So yeah. So look, Lewis, thanks very, very much, and I'm sure we'll meet again. I loved meeting up in Spain last year. That was super cool.
Yeah.